Afternoon. My name is Deacon Ron Jenkins, and I work with an organization called Chalice. But before I tell you much about myself, I wanted to show you something. Start with something here. I have this hanging in my office, and I look at it often. It brings back many memories, sometimes sad. And give you a bit of a clue as to what it might be. It comes from Guatemala. It's called a mecapal, and it's often used in child slavery. I've seen this used with children only that high. And how this works is it would go around your head like this. The ropes would be attached to a basket on your back. The basket could be full of corn, could be full of wood, could be full of rocks, anything that you need to move. But when you're using a mecapal, you have to hang on to the ropes. And so you would walk like this. In my travels around the world, I've noticed many, many children who are carrying loads that they never should have. And today, you're going to discover some of those children. I want to introduce you to some children. I work with an organization called Chalice. Chalice began about 19 years ago in a very small parish in Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. We had an idea that through the Catholic Church it would be great if we could start sponsoring children from Catholic missions around the world. And we started with 0 children 19 years ago. And today we're looking after 50,000 children in 17 different countries. Now Chalice, before we get to where we work, just to give you an idea about that mecapal in use that we just looked at. You can see some different versions of it actually from Guatemala itself. This is what I do with the organization mostly. I'm gone for about 6 months out of the year. And I travel anywhere from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island. I preach on the weekends, and then through the week I usually go to schools. And the reason I come to schools is that I discovered long ago that if I was going to talk about these children, I needed to visit them. I needed to know something about them. Chalice works in all of these countries. I've traveled to about 7 of them. A typical trip for me would be about 3 weeks long. I go by myself. I don't stay in any hotels. You'd find me underneath a mosquito net somewhere. I go to homes, I go to schools, I listen to songs, watch dances, and I come back as a witness. And I came back with so many stories, that's why I started coming to schools. Last year, I went to quite a few schools, gave this presentation to about 35,000 elementary school students and about 18,000 high school students and some university students as well. And so we're going to meet some of these children that live around the world, and we're going to talk a little bit at the end about how prayer is a part of this and how our neighborhood is actually branched out even more than we thought. And the first place we're going to go to is Paraguay. Now, if you like mystery stories, you'll like Paraguay. Paraguay is one of the only countries in the world that doesn't put out a tourist guide because they don't want tourists to come to their country. They practice isolation most of their existence. It's where a lot of the world criminals have hid out, actually. Part of Paraguay's history was so embarrassing that they rewrote the history books. And the young people there are learning a history that never happened. I left Regina Airport about 7 years ago, and it was minus 40. And I arrived in Paraguay, it was plus 40. And after spending about a day getting climatized, I decided to go for a walk in one of the 4 villages that surrounds the mission. And as I was walking along, all of a sudden, this fellow came up and he grabbed my hand and he wouldn't let go. Now, you all know his name. In Spanish, it's Jesus. In English, it's Jesus. If you ever wondered what Jesus looked like at 4.5, here he is, right there. Now, Jesus has 2 older brothers. The oldest is 10. The 3 of them orphans. They have no parents, they have no home. How they survive is they'll find somebody that will allow them to sleep on their dirt floor at night, and then during the day they'll go out searching for food. Now, this isn't unusual in our world. There are too many like Jesu. In fact, at that same mission, while I was there, this man came with his 5 children, and the missionary said he comes once a week to try to give them away. There are too many abandoned children in this world. Jesu was so starved for attention, so lonely, that I ended up putting him on my shoulders, carrying him. And when we left his mission, when we left his village, we both sort of cried. Now, if you go down this street, you'll come to a house that looks like a house where Jesu and his brothers might sleep at night. Now, there's obvious differences in this house. You can see from the outside it's quite different than your own. But it's what you don't see on the inside that's really different. Inside, you won't find a washroom. You won't find a kitchen. There are no plugs, so of course there's no TVs. They sleep on the floor, and it rains a lot there. You won't find any toys. And yet, the children still find ways of having fun. This particular picture is interesting because the girl in the background, when this picture was taken, is 13 years old. She's the oldest person living in that house. And they've been like that for almost 3 years. Again, that's not unusual. Brothers and sisters struggling to be able to keep their family together. On a trip to Ukraine, I met a family of 5. The youngest was 3, the oldest was 19, and had been like that for a couple of years. Now, one of the things that really surprised me about my journeys is how different the chores are that the children have. And I really can't even call them chores. You know, when I grew up, my chore was to empty the rubbish. And of course, my father would have to remind me every day. He'd say, empty the rubbish. And my famous line, which is still being used today, is, do I have to? Well, you would not find any of the children saying, do I have to? And their jobs are much different than ours. For example, the girl in orange, the girl in blue, every day after school, they go directly to the market, they pick up baskets of fruit and vegetables, and they stand on the street corner and sell them. And they don't keep the money. They take the money and give it back to their mother, because if they didn't do that, there wouldn't be enough to eat. If they didn't do that, there wouldn't be the possibility of going to school. If they didn't do that, they couldn't survive. They have to work. And some children have adult jobs, some very dangerous jobs, like this young fellow here. He's about 10 years old. I called him over to talk to him, and I noticed he has burn marks and scars on his face and on his arms and on his legs. And he told me that every day after school, he goes to work. He works in a steel mill, where the safety standards in Paraguay are just about non-existent. It's the only job available for him. He has to work, and he doesn't complain. Most of you here probably have your own room. All of these people that you see in this extended family, they all live in one room. They all share one room. And that's very, very common in most of these countries. Here is a bedroom that's probably more fortunate because they actually have beds. But you can see they would never keep out the mosquitoes. And they have no closets, and so they hang the clothes up on the rafters. I have 7 children that I sponsor myself, and I've met them all in their own countries, and some I even picked in the field, actually. And George was one of them. You see, George wanted to go to college, and he was in his last year of high school, and he was in the first half of the high school year, and they ran out of money. He couldn't go to school anymore. He was going to have to quit. In our organization, the hardest child to sponsor is any boy over 12 years old. The girls and the younger ones get sponsored first. And so I always asked for an older boy who wants an education. So when I was in Paraguay, I looked through the files and I found George's file, and He didn't even know that I had chosen him, but I went to the principal's office of his school. The principal called him in, and I said to him, "Can I be your sponsor?" And he quickly agreed. He was happy because then he would be able to go on to college. Now I'm very proud of him because he's in college now, and he's taking two complete different streams of education at the same time, agriculture and administration, and he works after school. He studies by candlelight on a dirt-floored bedroom, which is right behind him there. And this is the other part of his house. That's his family. He works hard because he has a dream. And I'm sure he's going to have this dream come true the way things are happening. Some of the older youth that used to be sponsored come back and they want to give back to the community, like this fellow here, teaching guitar to some of the younger ones, and the girl as well. And when I was in Paraguay, you know, it's not all sadness, that's for sure, because there's a real joy that the children have, even though they have nothing. There's still a joy that they share with you in different ways. I went to another project of ours run by the Dominican sisters. They have some very interesting missions there. One is they run the all-women's prison in the capital city of Asuncion. In fact, I met one of the sisters who actually gave the sentences out. In that particular prison that I visited, there were about 150 women. There were about 45 children, their own children, living in the prison. And they also have group homes for boys who basically nobody wants. They have no place to go. And here is one. Here they're getting ready for school. And the boys actually live there. And we purchased some professional ovens and some equipment so that they could learn a trade. This fellow comes in from the city to teach them a trade while they're there. Now, I like to have fun with the children when I'm there. In fact, I used to travel with this one fellow. Each of us would take 2 hockey bags full. His hockey bags would be full of medical supplies. My hockey bags would be full of toys, because I believed that the children should be able to have fun once in a while and do something different. This is a universal game. You probably all played this. You don't have to say any words in their language. You can just put the mat down and watch them have fun. But another game that we played, which was interesting, there was about 400 sponsored children came together, and I said, well, let's play bobbing for apples. They had never heard of that before because most of the children had never tasted an apple before. Apples are expensive. They're rare. So I bought some apples. We set up about 10 pails of water, tubs of water, and even the grandmothers got in line because they wanted to try it out. The children were biting at the apples to see how they tasted. I went to Bolivia about 3 years ago. I had a choice between going to the Philippines or Bolivia, and at that time I didn't think my body would take the trip to the Philippines, so I said, well, I think I'll go to Bolivia. It sounds a little bit easier. Well, I was wrong. Bolivia was one of the hardest places besides Haiti that I've ever been to. Bolivia, interesting countryside. If you get off your plane at the capital city of La Paz, which is in the upper corner of Brazil there, you'd be breathing like this. You see, that's way up in the mountains where the air is very, very thin. And believe it or not, the people who live in La Paz have bigger lungs than you do, have larger lungs than you do. They have to be able to take in more oxygen to be able to breathe properly. I always think about how amazing God is to make us differently that way. But if you land down by the border of Paraguay in a place called Santa Cruz, where it's quite warm and low, you can breathe okay, for sure. It took me about 3 weeks to get up to La Paz. I went to Bolivia to meet my sponsor child, Jacob, who lives in Yapacani. Yapacani is a rural area, and this fellow went with me to go out to Jacob's village, He actually gave up a year of his life to be a translator at the mission there. And here we are going out to Jacob's village. It took us about 4 hours in these trucks. And when we got out there was an elementary school. Jacob is in the blue shirt in the first row. And it's the first time we met. And so Jacob took me to introduce me to his mother, his family. He wants to become a teacher. Now, the odds of him completing that dream are very slim. As you see, in this particular elementary school, very few of these children have ever gone to high school. And the few that have gone, very few have graduated. The reason is because the high school is about 5 hours drive, and there's no cars, away from the village. For Jacob, he's very shy. He's a very smart boy, but he's very shy, and he's never been out of his village before. And he's going to have to live with people he doesn't know. And so that must be tough as well. So I'm praying for him for sure. Here he is with his family. And while we were there, the translator was translating the sponsors' letters to the children. That they could, actually, they live in an area where there is no mail whatsoever. There's no post office. There's not even the tradition of writing letters. Another type of house in Jacob's village. On Palm Sunday, they take the palms and make them in different ways. I always travel during Easter and Holy Week. It's a time when parishes don't want me to come and preach, and I've been blessed by going on that time because there's been so many traditions to see. And here, they're celebrating Palm Sunday in an outdoor stadium. And after that, the next day, we went to this school. This is a typical rural school in Bolivia. This is St. Joseph's School, grades 1 through 8. That's one of their 3 classrooms behind them. If you were to look at everything that you have in your own classroom, and I mean everything, there's not one thing that you can name that you have that they would have in their classroom. They don't even have a floor. They have a dirt floor. There's no desks, there's no chairs, there's no books, there's no paper, there's no pencils, there's no chalkboard. There's not one thing that you have that they would have. And yet, they will walk as much as 5 kilometers one way barefoot to come to school because they believe that education is a possible way to change their lives. The 3rd largest city in Bolivia has a very funny name, actually. It's called Cochabamba. Cochabamba is full of poor children, very few schools, very few teachers. If you get behind in your homework, there's no one there to help you. And so the education department asked us to set up some after-school programs. We set up 10 in the city. And they're great for many reasons, but the top reason in my book is this little fellow here. He was sitting across from me. That's his 3rd bowl of food. He knows that he won't get anything to eat like that for 24 hours. And so he's filling up. Another great reason for these after-school programs is that we've hired a teacher in each of them, and they help the students with their homework. And they become the best students in their schools. And you don't have to be sponsored to go to the program. More examples of young people with adult jobs. In the top corner here is a 13-year-old auto mechanic. The fellow in the other corner is about 10 years old. He gets $2 for about 12 hours work unloading bananas. These 2 fellows, they work about 16 hours, get $4 apiece, washing cars. This girl helps after school and weekends at the market. But you know something? They all have dreams. These 2 boys, one wants to be a doctor, one wants to be a lawyer. It's possible. I said, well, how do you make that dream come true? They said, we have to work hard. We have to study hard. And they really do. If you look up in the hillsides of Cochabamba, all around the valley, are these tiny little houses. These are rented to the poor. There's no water, there's no electricity. In fact, if this woman wants water for her house, she has to buy it in the city and lug it up on her back up the mountainside. And so you don't waste water that you purchased for baths. You wait until it rains. As we got closer to the house, the dirty curtain that was the door moved, and these two little ones came out. Little girl is 2 years old, and her babysitter is her 4-year-old brother. They're alone in that house for up to 12 hours a day. You see, there's no such thing as daycare. There's no money for babysitters. The mother has to work, the father has abandoned the family, and the children have to stay alone. And so I've met many children with some severe injuries because of that. While in the city, over Holy Week, I spent 4 days in a street boys' home, ages 5 through 12. There were about 50 boys there, and they have street girls' homes as well. The sisters rescued them from the streets. And these children were perhaps born there, abandoned there, runaways, living on the streets, and there's still thousands there. And I went to an intake center where they interview these boys for bringing them into their program. And I asked the sister, I said, well, you know, what do you look for with these children? And she says, well, we have to make sure they haven't damaged themselves. And I said, well, how would they damage themselves? She said, from sniffing glue, permanently damaging themselves. Sniffing glue to escape the reality of living on the streets all their lives. This is probably the most important picture that I had taken when I was in Bolivia. You see, if you live in a city in Bolivia and you can't afford to rent or to buy a home for your family, then you'd rent a space in places called hotels. Hotels are usually in the basements of large windowless buildings. And the priest took me to see this particular hotel. I had a flashlight, went down some stairs, and I quickly realized that in this particular hotel there were 5 rooms. In each room there were 10 families. Each family had between 5 and 7 people. If you look at this picture very closely, you can actually see 10 houses. Each of the mats is a house. The mat is a house for 5 to 7 people. All their belongings are piled up on there. And when they sleep, they have to keep inside that dimension. That girl was born there. She calls that home. She comes back to a place of hundreds of people, 1 toilet, no sink, and no shower. But the most amazing thing happened when I saw her face, though. When the flashlight lit up her face, she had this most beautiful smile on her face. She could have been sitting there hungry. She could have been sitting there hurting. She could have been sitting there lonely. And yet she gave me a smile. And 2 things came into my head. One is, there you are, Jesus. I see you. And the second, we don't smile enough here in Canada. A typical house that you might find even up in the capital city of La Paz. The story of this fellow in the green shirt, I have it here to remind me about how I'm living today even. We went to his house, very, very poor house. And the translator actually said to me, she said, you know, I've never seen such a sad boy. And when I go to these trips, I always take a half a dozen soccer balls with me. I push the air out of them, and I take the pumps as well. And I asked him, knowing full well what his answer would be, I said, do you have a soccer ball? And he said, no. I said, well, you come over to the church at 7 tonight, bring your mother, I'll give you a new soccer ball. I asked for his mother to come because I knew that it would get stolen unless she came. And giving him the ball was the first time I saw him smile. Children have a right to be children. But in most of my travels, when I looked into their eyes, I didn't see the eyes of children. Zambia. I hope you're not afraid of snakes. When I went to Zambia, I was met by 2 Zambian sisters at the airport, and the sister there said, how come you haven't been to Africa? I said, well, because I'm afraid of snakes. And so for 5 weeks, they kept taking me to places to see snakes. They'd take me for a walk in the jungle, and I'd say, I know what you're doing, sister. We want you to see something over here. I never saw one snake while I was there. And there's some pretty mean ones there. I went to Zambia to meet my sponsor child, Edgar. If you go down that road, you would find Edgar's village. He lives in a house like this, and the same deal goes. There's no washroom, there's no kitchen, there's a dirt floor. The interesting thing about this village, though, is behind the huts was this field, and there was some young people playing soccer. I'd never seen a soccer ball like that before. And I said to one of the young people, I said, you make me a ball like that, and I'll give you my hat. And he stayed up all one night, and he made me this soccer ball. This ball comes from this village. And just because they can't buy things doesn't mean they don't have fun. He would have got up one morning and said, I want to play soccer. Don't have money to buy a ball. There's no stores around to buy a ball. I have to make one. So he found some plastic bags. He pushed them together around a piece of foam he found somewhere. And then he had a big problem, because in his village, string is very difficult to find. So he had to make his own string. He cut another bag, very fine, and made the string to tie it up all together. So it was something that very creative they are in making their own toys, that's for sure. Oh, that's me with the chicken. One of the sponsors gave me this chicken as a thank you for helping their daughter. And as I was walking around the village with this chicken flapping its wings, the sister came up and took it from me. And that night we had chicken dinner. And I told Mother Superior, she said, you're looking kind of sad tonight. And I said, yeah, you killed my chicken. And I was going to take that back to Canada with me. This is a preschool in Mopika, one of the first in Zambia that we built. A typical day for Edgar would be, he'd get up in the morning, there would be no breakfast. He would grab one of those red containers and walk about 3 kilometers through real jungle to get to school. I walked that path just to see what it was like, and the sister kept saying, watch out for the snakes. And I kept thinking of poor Edgar going to school. At noontime they were given a hot meal, and even though they were very hungry, they would only eat a little bit. They'd scrape the rest in this container, and then they would take the rest back to their parents who hadn't eaten that day. I'm going to skip down a little bit to a story I want to share with you about these two brothers. In Zambia, because of disease, because of starvation, most of the middle-aged people have died. All that is left is the very young and the very old. They speak English there. And these two brothers came to tell me their story. They told me at the ages of 7 and 9, their parents died. They had no living relatives left to move in with. And so they looked around and they found a small abandoned cave on the edge of the jungle. They went into this cave to live, and each day they would go out and hunt to find things to eat. One day they were out hunting, and a big cobra came up in front of them and scared them so much they didn't dare go out looking for food anymore. They started to starve. The sisters found them and said, if you promise to go back to school and study hard, we'll give you food. We'll give you seeds to grow your own food. The boys agreed. And soon afterwards, we were able to find 2 Canadians to sponsor them. They're safe in the village now, but they have quite a story for sure. I know we're getting close to the end, so I really have to slip down here to some other slides, if I can get it to work. Here we are. I've traveled through Ukraine, and one of the things that really shocked me about you, oops, there's Santa Claus. I suppose I have to tell you the story now. When I was in Haiti, if you go to Haiti and you look like me in a place where the people are starving, it's embarrassing. Kids come up and think I'm the Pillsbury Doughboy. And so, Christmas week, Father Tony came to me and he said, I don't want to embarrass you, but you're probably the biggest person around here. He says, would you be our Santa Claus? We never had one before. And I said, sure. I said, you got a Santa suit? He said, no. So we rode into Port-au-Prince. I found a red tablecloth and a red hat. That's all I could find. Cut the tablecloth up and made some shorts. Used an old red chasuble. Turned it inside out. Found a hat. Put it on my head and a roll of cotton from the hospital. And Father Tony wrote me not long ago and said the children are still having nightmares from the Santa that they saw, for sure. One of the things that surprised me when I went to schools around the world is that they did a lot of the same things that we do in our schools in the morning. They sang their national anthem, and then they said a prayer. But what surprised me most is that they said a prayer for you. Most of the schools I went to, the young people there said a prayer for the young people here in Canada. Whenever I say that, most students in their mind, they tell me afterwards, why are they praying for me? I have so much more than they do. Why do they pray for me? They honestly think of you as being brothers and sisters. They pray for you because they want you to be happy. They pray for you because they want you to be healthy. They pray for you because they want you to have everything that God wants you to have. Prayer doesn't even cost a penny. So it's something that you can give back, and believe me, it does make a difference. We just opened a new site in Tondo, Philippines. If you were to Google the name Tondo, you would see another word come up, Smoky Mountain, which would describe what it used to be. You see, Hong Kong and a lot of the large cities would take their garbage there and dump it in this site, and then a city grew up on top of this garbage. And so now there are thousands of children living there, pouring through the dumps, trying to find pieces of metal, anything that they can sell. And they pray for you. And so who will tell their story? You know, if I were to cover up that boy's face in the green, if I didn't tell you his story, it would be like he would be invisible, right? Like he wouldn't even exist. You wouldn't even know he was on this planet. If I didn't tell you Jesus' story, if I didn't tell you the story about the children in St. Joseph's School, it would be like they didn't even exist. And so we need to be storytellers. We need to be story carriers. It's important that we share those stories. The more people that know this boy's story, the more he becomes real. It helps him, even just to share the story. And so what I'm challenging you to do is to remember even a part of one of these stories, and in the next 24 hours, tell someone that story. It'll be helping that child tremendously. You'll each get a bracelet, and on the bracelet it says, I can tell your story. This is a reminder to tell and share that story. You'll also get more information about our organization, Chalice, to see how you can help out or do more research about these areas. And so I want to thank you very much for listening, for being attentive, and now you're on my team. Now you're all storytellers, you're all story sharers and carriers. Please keep these children in your prayers, and please make them real by telling their story. Thank you.